Pretty much, I'm going to hand over to you, Lewis. I think that's everything I needed to say. Yeah, very excited to be hosting you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Morning. As Phoebe said, I'm Lewis Jamieson. I'm the CEO of Music Declares Emergency, which is a UK-based CIO, which is a type of charity, for those of you who care about these things, that launched in 2019 and was founded by predominantly people who work within the UK music industry, but also incorporated some managers, some artist managers, and some artists as well, and various other fellow travelers along the way. In the 6 years that the Music Declares has been in existence, we've transitioned really from starting out as a campaign group, trying to encourage the music industry to promote and follow sustainable practice, to achieve better practice across their various sectors, to working with artists and encouraging them to use their advocacy power and advising them on how to do that, particularly in public spaces. And increasingly, in the last 2 or so years, we have started to work more directly with fans. Um, Partly that's because we realized that there was a flaw in our logic for the first few years, that we didn't really have an offering for fans, and ultimately they're the end goal of the influence we're trying to create, and also partly because of feedback from music fans saying, "How do I get involved?" Our stated mission from the beginning, and it remains pretty much our core mission, is to use the power of music to increase and encourage engagement with the climate emergency and the conversations around it and the solutions to it. We are avowedly apolitical. We have to be, as we're a charity, but we were even before we were a charity. We believe that the only way to really get progress on the climate emergency is to encourage mass engagement and to find areas of consensus in the population, which often means talking to people that either are not aligned to what we think, or on several occasions are vehemently opposed to what we believe. We believe that music, and particularly music for us, but indeed any kind of creative endeavor, is a very powerful way to cut through a lot of the differences that we see in our society, and to find common ground on which we can at least start to build some kind of conversation. So that's the kind of idea behind Music Declares Emergency. The reality behind it is that we started with a thing called a Declaration of a Climate and Ecological Emergency in 2019. These were very much all the rage in 2019. Lots of people did them. UK government, lots and lots of local authorities, other international governments, charities, all manner of people. Essentially, what that declaration was and is a recognition that we are in a climate emergency, and is a recognition that we have to take steps to mitigate and solve the problems that are causing it. For us, ultimately, it was a way of getting people to show support. So that declaration still exists and it's still there to be signed. Although if you go rushing off to sign it now, if you haven't done, you'll find it doesn't exist because we're in the process of changing our web server. So give it a week. It is signed by 4,000 or so artists of all kinds of scales, from the very, very biggest like Billie Eilish all the way down to grassroots artists, about 2,000 industry organisations, including pretty much all of the key ones in the UK, BPI, AIM, all the majors, most of the independents of scale, a lot of independents of smaller mom and pop kind of record labels, and then 2,000 individuals in the UK music industry. So that's part one of our support. Part two of our support is the movement, which is the fan base thing that we've been building for 2 years. That's created by one-to-one recruitment at festivals and at gigs, through volunteers who give their time, and we're very grateful to them, to sign people up, explain our mission and sign people up. That currently stands, as of today, at around 16,000. It fluctuates over the summer because we're constantly recruiting, but it's about 16,000 music fans across the UK. So that's all in all, there's about 24,000 different types of supporters engaged directly with us, and then a kind of laid back support of goodness knows how many tens of thousands across social media and all other kind of things. So I've been asked really today to try and give you an overview of where we see as an organization that sits across the entirety of the music industry, all sectors, and indeed all the way from businesses down to across to, I should say, to music consumers, which I think makes us quite unique. There are a lot of organizations now in the music industry involved in sustainability, and they tend to be sector specific. So you've got things like Live Green coming out of Live that deal with live. You've got things like the Music Climate Pact, which we're one of the supporters of, that deals with recording and so forth and so on. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes just whizzing through where we're at, where we were, and where we're at, to give some context. Then what I'm going to do is talk about what I think is possible. Now I'm aware that the people that are on this call come from all kinds of different sectors. So I'm going to try and keep it general. But what I want to do is build in a good portion of time at the end of this call for you to ask questions or to raise points. So I'm looking at the idea of giving about 20 minutes for that. So hopefully that's going to work for you. If there are no questions, I'll just keep talking. That's what I always do. So reeling back to what I suggested, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with where we were and where we're at. So when we formed in 2019, one of the key reasons that Music Declares Emergency came together was that we felt there was not a cohesive kind of approach to the issues of both the impact of the music industry in terms of climate emergency, but also the power of the music industry to be a positive force within it. The generational mix that came to the table that formed us was such that while some people would talk about rock against racism in the late 70s and punk, and people like myself would talk about the 80s and Red Wedge and Free Nelson Mandela and artists against apartheid, other people would come in talking about the 90s and acid house and into the 2000s and Black Lives Matter. But all of us had this idea that music had played a key role in all the major societal issues and changes and progressions that we'd seen over generations. And yet, when it came to the climate crisis, which arguably is the most existential problem we face as a race, it wasn't really saying much, and it certainly wasn't saying anything as a cohesive force. So we formed these declares emergency on the basis of trying to bring together the various actors we knew who were already working in this space, and there were people doing stuff, but they were not aligned together, to create a kind of umbrella group, to create a club, and to start to really get some kind of momentum behind the idea that music could play a role in this. Post our formation, we saw various things. And if I just go through the sectors, it's interesting to note the transitions that have happened. So the most challenging area in terms of bringing down emissions and also in terms of creating best practice and finding ways to lessen impact is live. Live has the biggest problems. It's power hungry. It has a huge amount of transport involved. In terms of outdoor life, it's located in the natural environment. So there are all kinds of knock-on effects in terms of waste and water usage and so forth. But even in the indoor space, it has all these problems or challenges, shall we say, around not just the artists that come into the space, but also the audience that come into the space. When we started in 2019, there wasn't really a cohesive response to that. What we've seen in the period since is all kinds of things. So we've seen Live Green form out of Live, which is a kind of body within Live that is looking to increase best practice. We've seen the growth of people like A Greener Future, who used to be a Greener Festival, who a carbon auditing company, but also a kind of live development strategists, who are the people alongside the Tyndall Centre and Massive Attack behind the 1.5 gigs, which you may have come across, the Massive Attack shows in Liverpool and then subsequently at Lido Festival. In London, the first major uses of solar charged battery powered outdoor performances in the UK, and essentially suggesting a pathway forward for live that does not rely on diesel generation. So that was one of the main challenges. So Live's challenges with diesel generation was the big one, because they were reliant on diesel generators. And any of you working outdoor live will know that it's not just one diesel generator per stage, it's two, because you need a backup. So there's all kinds of waste issues around that. So removing diesel generation is definitely one of the things that is a focus. Gridding festivals is another thing that's a focus, and there are all kinds of working groups on that, trying to get festivals onto the actual grid, which is the kind of gold standard. But also, you saw across AEG's festival commitments, across Live Nations, Green Nations, so the really big players in the last few years, but also down into independents, and particularly people like Shambhala, who've been pioneers in this space, but also Kendall Calling. I'm not going to list them all. Across a lot of UK festivals, you've seen real action on areas like waste, water, and preserving the natural environment. They seem to be the three things that are most kind of prevalent within the live space. And there are things that are worth considering if you're working in that space. So there's some really good things to look at there. So Kendall Calling did a thing called Leave Only Memories, which was focused on making sure that the site was clear and that tents were removed and so forth. And they achieved really good results through a public messaging campaign that encouraged their audience to make sure that they respected the site and took their tents home. Simple piece of communication, but a very effective one. I think it was 99.8% of the tents were off site. Um, Lido this year looked at their waste, and they're saying no waste to landfill. This is another thing. So there are now companies out there, supportive companies that can deal with kind of canned waste and get that off site and into recycling spaces, but also the people who will deal with waste water and recycling systems to ensure that you're not wasting water. So the supportive systems that help and enable this kind of work to go on in that space are definitely developing. And then a lot of festivals are looking at their food offerings. Now, the headlines will be around Massive Attack again at Lido, where I think that day it was a plant-based only menu. And obviously Billie Eilish has just dropped into the O2 and reprieved her thing of making the O2 completely plant-based for the whole of her run there. And indeed, I think the whole of the run of the UK tour. Um, I think sometimes with those kind of things around food offerings, for those of you who are in that space and interested in that work, it can be quite daunting. It can be quite challenging because when you look at that, you think, "Oh my God, have I got to do that?" My argument would be you don't have to do that. You don't have to be that kind of strict on it. Any kind of movement towards, and this is kind of a general kind of thing to say across all sectors, is any movement towards something positive is good. And one of the kind of guiding mantras that Music Declares has always had is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So there may be people on this call that are thinking, well, I'm a small venue, or I'm just setting out a small festival. I'm relying on this, that, or the other. I don't have the capacity to do that, but any kind of movement towards that can be good. So in life, there is a movement, and there's a change of kind of response, and there's a change of attitude going on in live anyway. So for those of you on this call in live, I think what I would say is you're starting to be in a space that has positive momentum anyway. And one of the things that I always talk about with live is green riders. Again, they're a thing that those of you who do work in live will be aware of, but there's a lot of misconceptions about them as well. Um, both from the artist side and from the agent promoter side, although it's getting better, I would stress. So a green rider essentially is not just a list of things from the artist saying, I don't want water bottles and I don't want packed sandwiches. A proper green rider should look at the entirety of the offering from the venue, and it should be the artist saying, this is my gold standard of what I would like. So it will contain simple things like, please don't give me bottled water. I'm bringing a water bottle. I can fill it from a tap. And please don't give me a load of food I've not asked for. But it could also, and often also does go into things like, tell me about your power. Tell me where your power comes from. Tell me where your lighting comes from, etc., etc., etc. And what are your logistics? How do you do things within the venue? And again, I think talking to some people in the space when green riders are starting to become more prevalent, there is a fear of them. There is an expectation that smaller venues, who I understand are under huge financial pressure and now under more pressure to change their systems. I don't think that's the case. I think what it is it's about a journey towards a better way of doing things. And the thing I was just saying to Phoebe before we started is one of the most important things around all of this work is that those of you who are in live sectors and those of you who are in venues, um, talking about what you can do and talking about what you'd like to do but can't do is as powerful as actually doing it. One of the kind of strengths of Music Declares Emergency over the years we've been in existence has not been necessarily the work we've done. It's about the ability we've had to convene people around the ideas we would like to see go forward. So, for instance, if a venue says, well, we've been trialing this, but we'd like to do this, but we can't afford it, and other venues go, well, we'd like to do that as well, you start to build a community of people who have a desire. And from that desire can come the solutions to essentially the funding problem, or indeed the kind of critical mass you need to make something realistic. I often use this argument in Live Again when I look at things like Coldplay, who I know are always, kind of a bit of a Marmite band for a lot of people. But in terms of what they've been doing on Music of the Spheres, on that tour, a lot of the work they've been doing has not necessarily succeeded, but what it has done is it's laid down a blueprint for work that can succeed. So possibly the only place that I've seen where an idea of trickle down economics actually works. So artists like Coldplay investing heavily in new technologies will actually develop those technologies at scale and will allow those technologies to become more affordable for those of us who don't have Coldplay's resources. So that's kind of a brief, and I stress brief, overview of Live. I think the challenges for Live that exist are obviously, I'm aware of the funding. We do a lot of work with Music Venue Trust and various other live kind of organisations, so we're very aware of the pressures on smaller venues in particular, but venues up to arena size these days. But I think that the atmosphere you're operating in, I think, is more benign to this kind of work, and that simple changes that are immediately transferable to your audience. So whether that be in terms of making water points available if you have those, or making it clear that people are allowed to bring refillable water bottles in, and there's not going to be a problem at the door with that. It seems like a minor thing, but it in terms of messaging and in terms of a kind of understanding of the principles of the venue, it's a very simple thing. There are other things that you can do around that, in terms of making your travel options, your sustainable travel options available and making people aware on your website. So trying to encourage people not to use cars and so forth. And something else I just want to throw out there while I'm here, we are talking to a variety of venues about trying to build what we're calling a plug and play system. So that would be a backline, a UK system of venues that have backline available. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in that conversation, if that's something you're interested in, that again is an attempt to cut down travel miles. It's also an attempt to open up availability of music spaces to new artists who maybe don't have the equipment that they need to play, but have the talent. And also, again, from an audience point of view, it's a way of signaling to an audience that there are ways to deliver live music that are not dependent on the old ways of transit vans full of gear driving up and down the country. So. I'm just going to briefly then move on to recording. Again, I have no idea where people are from, so I'm just trying to cover all bases here. MDE is a founding supporter of the Music Climate Pact, and I think that, again, is another milestone that shows just how far music in general has come in terms of this conversation since we started in 2019. When we started in 2019, conversations around all kinds of things to do with recording were very, very fractured. So, for instance, our early conversations around the procedure for returns of vinyl, which I was horrified to hear had changed since I'd worked in a record company in the advent of mail order. And that any record that had any kind of blink or kind of tear or slight kind of damage to the sleeve was immediately scrapped, was horrifying. So, the dinked record thing became a conversation. The recording industry has now signed up to the Music Climate Pact. The Music Climate Pact is a global understanding between the three majors and a huge amount of independent labels across the world to follow assigned pathways to a zero carbon future. So it's the first time that we've seen the entire recorded music industry actually commit to make changes to find their way to a zero carbon future. And that obviously is going to be a circuitous route, I would imagine. It won't be as straightforward as it sounds. But nonetheless, the commitment is there. And because of the base of that commitment, in terms of recording, we're now seeing an explosion of kind of innovation in vinyl in particular, but in recording in general. I'm sure anybody who is anywhere involved in recorded music can't have failed to have seen the plethora of eco vinyls that are out there. Whether it be recycled vinyl, whether it be a plant-based mycelium vinyl, whether it be all manner of different things. Some are better than others, if the truth be told. Some are not as eco as they claim to be, and we are in a bit of a transition period where we're trying to work out which ones are actually, the best options. But nonetheless, I think again, as a symbol of the direction of travel, we're seeing that kind of innovation, and we're also, most importantly, seeing an audience recognition of that innovation, an audience understanding of what it represents. And in a sense, for me in particular, personally, I find that that's almost more important. And I think in general, I pick up on that point. In a sense, the impact of the UK music industry, positive or negative, on the climate emergency is, if we're absolutely honest, negligible when you look at things like energy production, energy usage, agriculture, transport. However, in fact, that's true of the global music industry. However, the ability of the music industry to inform, educate, and influence consumer and therefore public behavior is colossal. And so, in a sense, things like creating a vinyl product that has negligible or no impact on the environment is really important to us, because what it does is it inverts that constant conversation around eco options, which pretty much goes something like, the only way you can deal with the climate emergency is to have less of everything. So if you can find a way to say, nope, you can have the same of everything, it's just a different everything, that really does get to the heart of that pushback, and I think that's really really important. And I'm kind of scattering around a little bit, sorry, train of thought, but that also applies across other areas of the music industry. But I will stick with recording for now. So for those of you who, practical terms, who are running record labels or making records, again, we're aware, very, very aware, that at the smaller end of the spectrum, the cost barriers can be prohibitive. So again, there are things that you can do, but again, I would suggest, and I would very much recommend, that you don't work on the basis that if you can't do the best, you don't do anything. If you cannot afford to take an eco option for vinyl because of the print run you're working on, or because, I don't know, they're coming closer, but it's still kind of the case that the eco version is likely to be slightly more expensive. You don't believe your market can withstand that, or you're taking a risk on printing them in the first place, and you don't want to be left holding more expensive stock. You can still look at things like how you wrap the thing, what card are you using, what paper are you using, those kind of things. You can look at ways of how you distribute it. You can look at those kind of methodologies as well. Any step that you can take towards better is always good. And most importantly, if you're going to take those steps, being able to communicate why you're taking those steps to your potential audience is really important as well. Those are the real wins at any scale. It doesn't matter if you're Polydor doing the Billie Eilish campaign and doing thousands and thousands of eco vinyls, or somebody printing up 200 copies of the first 7 inch of your band or the band you manage. Investing your values from the start is really really important. And I'll just give you a very brief example of that. So we've been working with Lambrini Girls for a while now, and we really value the fact that at every point in their career, they've made a point of showing their support for the ethics and the morals and the values that we incorporate. And because they've been doing it since the start, it's just normal for them to talk about it. The same goes for a few other bands we've worked with from the start, like Nova Twins and so forth. What they're saying is not exceptional, and what they're saying is not controversial for their audience. And because as audiences onboarded, they're onboarded generally by people that are already fans of the band, or they become part of the community, it just becomes normal. So the power of that, if you start from the beginning with those values, it is really, really important, because it just becomes part of what you are. And that, in a sense, given that our mission is to normalize this stuff, it's really useful for us when artists or venues or record labels or any kind of organization essentially is making what we're talking about and what we're doing together normal from the very beginning, because we don't have to cross that point of going, now we're going to make a big announcement about something. It's just part of the whole. So yes, so with recording at any scale, it's just about doing what you can do, really, but then communicating that. I mean, it's also interesting to note, and this is true of merch as well, that sometimes you will find that if you communicate effectively, you can actually justify a slightly higher price. And the example I'd use, a friend of mine works for a big merchandising company, and every year they do a bobble hat for one of their clients. It's just a thing they do every single year. And 2 years ago, he and the band sat down and said, "Look, we'd like to make this a bit more ethical. Here's some options to source it. You know, it's organic cotton, it's rainwater grown, etc., etc. We can validate the whole production process, similar to the production process we use for our t-shirts that we make. But it adds £2 to each unit." So they said, "Well, we'll give it a go." But they communicated the fact that it was £2 more expensive than last year for these reasons, and they sold more. And we found that anecdotally with other artists that we've worked with and helped, that when they've gone on tour, when they've sold merch that is slightly more expensive, but they put information on the merch stand explaining why it's more expensive, they've actually sold more. So it's not for me to tell you to take a financial risk if you're in the business of making things and selling them, but if you have the scope to experiment a little bit, you know, it's an interesting experiment to do if you have the scope to do it. And then the last area I'm going to skip on to briefly, and then I'm going to open this up for questions, is artist and artist management, because obviously that's the core part of this conversation for us. So we have the same conversation with artists pretty much every time that we start to talk to them. So the conversation goes something like, "Oh, I love what you do. Thank you very much. I'd love to support it. Well, brilliant. What would you like to do?" "Well, I can't really because I fly." That's the opening conversation 90% of the time with any artist at any scale. So any signed artist that we talk to, which is on the one hand a little bit depressing, because it shows you the pressure that artists are under to overconsider every single action they make in a way that members of the public are not. But it's also frustrating because clearly it's unreasonable to expect an artist who is reliant on touring to not get on a plane at some point. And of course, the answer back is that's fine. We can explain that. And so, just briefly, this is our explanation of why it's okay for artists to fly to America, Australia, and other places in order to play live. And hopefully, it's one that either you'll go, "Yeah, I think that," or you'll go, "Oh, no, I never thought of that." So it goes like this: we live in an era of cheap travel, relatively cheap travel. We also live in an area of in an era of fandom. Sorry. If an artist of any scale decides that they are not going to play anywhere that they can't get to without flying, they are inevitably going to attract their audience to fly to them instead. So instead of, and this kind of works for us at any scale, we would argue. So if you've got a band that are playing kind of 2,000 cap venues, so they've got a crew of about six, so the band's four, say. So say there's a touring party of 12, 12 people go to America. So to make that equation work, you have to assume that that artist has more than 12 fans in America that will get on a plane. It seems pretty logical to us that that's the case. And once you start to scale it up to the likes of, Radiohead, Billie Eilish, etc., it becomes abundantly clear that in an era of cheap travel, you are going to see a hell of a lot more flights going in the opposite direction. And therefore, just on a basic logical approach, it's impractical to suggest that artists should not fly in order to play live. So that's kind of the starting point of any conversation we have with an artist. But in terms of what we would like to see artists do, and in terms of what artists can do, of course, there's a whole range of things. And we are very aware that a lot of the things that we would like to see artists do are interdependent on other entities within their structure. Another misconception, particularly in the media, and the thing we spend quite a lot of our time working with the artists we work with on, is getting over the idea that the artist is the final arbiter of every decision that's made in their name. Because as we all know, that's not the case. In fact, a lot of the time the artist is under pressure to do things that the artist necessarily would not like to do, but is persuaded to do by the team around them for various reasons, some good, some bad. As an ex-manager, I've been part of that process, so I'm not going to condemn managers, but I understand the dynamic. The most powerful thing artists can do, and the most powerful thing artist managers can do, is let them do this, is to allow them to speak. The most powerful thing an artist has is their direct communications channel to their fans. We live in an era where many of the kind of authorities and the kind of promoters of truth that we used to believe in have lost their meaning, whether it be religious leaders, whether it be political leaders, whether it be community leaders. We live in an era of a post-fact era. In fact, I kind of gave a long talk about I don't understand why the climate community keeps going on about facts when we in the same breath as saying we live in a post-fact era. It doesn't matter whether you're right anymore. It matters whether people believe that you're right. And artists are extremely useful and extremely powerful in that dynamic. So we would always say to any artist that said to us, "What can I do?" At any scale, the first thing you can do is show publicly that you support whatever it is that you support. And of course, the problem with the climate emergency is that can be anything from ecological kind of action to political action to economic action to societal action. So the second thing that I would say to anybody who's in the artist sphere is we exist and we're not the only ones, but we particularly like to exist in a space where we help artists to work out what it is they want to actually say. Our first question to any artist after the conversation about flying is always, well, what do you want to talk about? We're not in the business of saying, this is our campaign, will you support it? We are in the business of saying, these are the campaigns, these are the areas we campaign on, but what do you want to talk about? Is it your local river or is it polar bears? Is it fossil fuel finance? Or is it rewilding? Because all of that is valid, and there are all kinds of conversations and creative kind of campaigns we can work out around that stuff. At a very base level, what an artist can do and what anybody on this call can do, actually, it doesn't matter what you're doing, what you can do at a base level without even getting more than your toes wet, I would suggest, and it was designed very much with this in mind, is you can support the No Music on a Dead Planet campaign simply by posting it, by putting it in your venue, by sticking it on the back of your record, by wearing a t-shirt, joining the many artists who've worn a t-shirt. We designed that campaign explicitly with that in mind to get round the problem of artists and other kind of organizations getting bogged down in interminable conversations about what they were supporting. It's designed as a slogan that has a now understood meaning for action for climate support without having to go into the weeds of what that actually means. So if you just want to show your support but not get too bogged down in it, bang, give me a shout. I'll give you the logo. You can put it on your socials. You can mural it on your walls. You can stick it on a poster. You can do what you like with it, within reason, obviously. But that's what it exists for. Um, but with artists who want to go a bit deeper, obviously there are all kinds of creative things you can do, and we can help with that. But what we're trying to do is get to a point of finding a position where you help us to translate the idea of getting involved to your fan base. And then on a practical level, there are things that artists can do, of course. The big one, which I kind of touched on a bit ago, is merch. Merch is the kind of hidden, ugly secret of the music industry when it comes to sustainability, and it's probably the last tower that needs to be kind of raised. There's too much to go into here, but the basic headlines are firstly how it's made. And there are all kinds of organizations, companies out there now who can show you a genuine audited production line that will keep you safe from false claims if you want to go down the route, excuse me, of creating ecologically sustainable merchandise. There are also a lot of companies out there that will tell you their stuff's sustainable and it isn't. So please look at the numbers and please shout us if you are interested in that conversation, and we will get in the weeds with you on that. The second one, which people don't talk about so much, is range. Again, I understand the pressures of economics, but there is a tendency, or there has been a tendency in merch to consistently over increase the merch offer. We, to a degree, even as a sustainable charity, got a bit caught up in this recently, where we were like, oh, we can make this and we can make that. And because we thought, oh, it's sustainable, we thought, well, that's fine, it's all justifiable. And then we kind of took a step back and went, actually, do we really can we really justify this? Do we really need another tote bag? Do we really need another one of those? So it's hard. I understand if you're looking to promote a range to make money, but I think really seriously considering what is a reasonable amount of range and considering the usability of your products. So, for instance, anybody who criticizes us as a charity for making t-shirts, I, I essentially say, well, I wear t-shirts, everyone wears t-shirts. Our t-shirts are better made than most t-shirts. I think that's to a degree justifiable. I know there's a wider conversation about, the amount of clothes that people own and so forth and so on. But again, better, good. It's not the part of either Music Declares or indeed individual artists or businesses to start re-engineering the entire consumer base of the global market. You have to be realistic about the space you're working in. But at the same time, is it justifiable to start checking out a mug? Not really. Or a variety of mugs, maybe one, not 10, so it's a difficult conversation, I understand, but there are practical things. And again, if you communicate to your audience base, we are doing a limited run of a limited design of t-shirts because we want to make sure that what we're doing is in line with our ethics, then I think what you do is you get an understanding from your audience about why you're doing it, and you get an understanding and an interest in the offer that you're making. So that's the thing I touch on really. I'm going to open this up for questions because I don't really want to ramble around for the next 20 minutes. I've tried to harden an hour to try and kind of cross the whole music industry, but hopefully I've picked up some points that are of relevance. But I'd really like to open up for questions so I can actually answer some of the things or get involved in conversations that are relevant to you. So does anybody have a question or a thing to say?
I have a question.
Mm,
Sorry, my webcam's not working. I
okay.
work in brand partnerships, like
Yes.
mostly in like music and entertainment.
Mm,
In terms of like getting initially brands on board to like be like becoming part of this initiative, are there
mm.
any quick wins that kind of opens up the conversation that you've experienced with brands before that kind of enables you to get them to understand how the process could work so it becomes a bit more of a long-term strategy?
Okay. Yes. I mean, excuse me. The first challenge with any brand is making sure that you're not sitting down with the devil, without which to be
Yeah.
too dramatic. Um, which it can be a little more complicated than you think. I mean, the other thing is that again, you have to kind of put on your reasonable head. Ultimately, if you're dealing with commercial companies, there's going to be something about them that isn't perfect pretty
Yeah.
much all the time. But I think, if you've got a company that are justifiably, the kind of gold standard again was B Corp, although there's kind of questions around B Corp status now. So I think you just have to be sure in yourself with the brand that you can stand up for what they're saying, because there'll always be somebody who has an opinion that's contrary to there'll always be somebody who thinks you're doing the wrong thing. But in terms of the wins, I mean, it depends on the brand, but there's an obvious win here for brands, which is that and this is a thing I say to record companies in particular, or and to businesses, is that essentially, in the main, you're marketing to a young audience. I know that's not necessarily the case as much as it was because of the rise of people like me, i.e., the six music dad, these people who refuse to go away and are still interested in music, even though we're supposedly too old to be there. Um, but in the main, you are dealing with a young audience and a young consumer audience, or youngish, 30 down, yeah. And if you look at the social studies of that cohort of people, things like climate justice and things like sustainability and things like the sustainability policies and where things come from are more important to them. I don't agree with this idea that Gen Z are all super eco warriors, because that would then why are Temu and Shein so popular? It's not as straightforward as that, but it certainly is a direction of travel. And therefore, there is an argument to those brands that, on a nakedly kind of commercial basis, that positioning yourself in this space could have financial opportunity. But then I think there's a further kind of thing there, which is that ultimately I think we're reaching a point where the brands that can and the brands that can show that they get it and that in a sense they're trying to realign what they do to show that, and to create things that are of value in ways that are acceptable. They're the ones that are going to succeed. And they're not just going to succeed because they will sell more products. They're going to succeed because they will get more airtime. And also, ultimately, as legislation comes in around carbon taxing, which is happening in Europe already, they will succeed because they'll be on the right side of the tax regimes that they're operating in, if you want to be absolutely true about it. But also in terms of alignment with artists, artists particularly, and not all artists, obviously, there will be artists, and certainly you see that in K-pop, who are, more than happy to sponsor a McDonald's burger. But again, it's not about the whole, it's about the part, and it's about micro markets, and it's about consumers. And if a brand really wants to develop something, then the wins are that they can put themselves in that space quite quickly and get understanding of what they're trying to do through alignment, which is what brand partnerships has always been about, really. But there is a ready-made kind of audience that's interested in this stuff for them to, we've got, as I say, 16,000 members and God knows how many social followers. No Music on a Dead Planet's been seen by 500,000,000 people worldwide. So there is a space there that's already open for them to talk in.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else from anywhere? I can see people from live and stuff. I wonder if there's any questions around live. I can see people from jazz, and I'm aware I haven't really gone into genres and so forth, and I know that there are different challenges across genre as well. So I'm just wondering if there's any kind of specifics around that. If people are interested in, well, I'm just going to pick it up because I can see Jazz North there. So I think the interesting thing with jazz and with classical is that it's predominantly an older audience. I appreciate jazz has had a moment, so I'm not trying to be too stereotypical here. I know Ezra and all those various new jazz artists are bringing new audiences in, but it is predominantly an older and probably a slightly more financially secure audience. That's of real interest to us, and it's something we haven't had the capacity to really go into yet, but we would very much like to go into it. And I think there's a different kind of conversation there, which is based around the kind of ability of those fans to be curators of a space, and to be kind of elders in a space. And that to me resonates with the musical form that has a longer heritage, and has a slightly higher heritage, if you will, higher intellectual heritage. So we've done some work in classical. We have a specific group in classical because we don't understand classical, and they do a lot of work around instruments, and a lot of work around sourcing materials and stuff. But they also do a lot of work around audiences as kind of intellectual creators rather than as activists, which is what the younger kind of cohorts we do. A lot of work with our younger, the movement members who are generally 25 down. We're always getting them to do things, whereas with the classical, that it's more about a more subtle kind of influence. So I'm very interested in conversations with jazz artists around how we can frame conversations with their audience that are applicable to their audience, that won't be about, kind of shouting about things, or, getting a tattoo that says no music on a dead planet, a temporary tattoo, I stress, but more about the things that are kind of appropriate for that audience to do. But I do think there's a very important role for those more established or slightly different musical genres to play in this. And of course, jazz, you know, has a large home listenership, a lot, and that kind of more strategic, maybe influential in the community, maybe more traditional political roots. That's of interest, and I think jazz musicians can certainly, help in that, especially the ones that are established. Someone's got a hand up.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
If people want to just unmute and just like chat, that's
Mm.
that's the space for this. So cool.
Hi, yeah, Carol here from Delia Derbyshire. So we're a small electronic music charity,
Yeah.
and very aware of the plastic, the waste that comes along with music technology.
Mm.
One of the things we do try to advocate is obviously secondhand, used products, but a lot of the products we do use, for example, iPads, GarageBand on iPads in schools, There's always compatibility issues around our iPads are from 2017, and we can't put any other apps on it apart from current plan. So there's all those limitations. But I was wondering, do you know of any initiatives that are things like people, some kind of what could you call it, product exchange or something like just the fact that we all got a billion USB cables we don't need.
Yes, interesting you should say this.
Is that something we're looking into possibly seeing how we could contribute that, based in Manchester especially, but also thought it'd be worth asking if things like that already exist?
Yeah, I mean the sad answer is there's various small initiatives, and I think there's one initiative, and I can't remember the name of it, which will recycle your USB cables, but there isn't a kind of more cohesive instrument exchange or instrument repair initiative. It's as with many things at the start, we've got it here where I live in Sutton. There's like a repair cafe kind of place, but they're swamped. I took a speaker down there that needed refoaming, not for them to give it me back. I just said, "Do you want this? You can have it and sell it." And they were like, "Yeah, mate, but I'm not sure we'll get around to it in the next month because we've got all this, and they're volunteers. We are in the midst of a conversation with a major tech company who do a lot of accessories mainly rather than computers about surely sooner or later the right company is going to seize the day on this and is going to work out that offering some kind of mentorship or some kind of exchange or something along the lines of encouraging regenerative kind of systems around tech is going to be a big win. So I will keep you posted on how that goes. One of the things we talk to the University of South Wales about, who we do the Immerse Festival with each year, is trying to start, although it's finding the funding, is trying to start a course, whether it's an add-on course to an existing course or whether it's an actual degree level course, in kind of regenerative systems funded by some kind of tech company that would look at how to build a business model out of this. Because our argument, and it's when we're fortunate in that we partner with an organization, a business called Kid A, who are very involved in the mobile accessories sphere. They essentially are sustainability experts in mobile accessories, and they increasingly are auditing all the accessories that go on various supplier stores. They started with Vodafone. Now they're working with O2 because Vodafone, O2, the same thing. And we have been talking to them about things around tech. So, for instance, headphones that you can replace bits on rather than the whole thing. The phones you can take batteries out of, all that kind of stuff. But also, as part of that conversation is how can we take perfectly usable tech and either upgrade it so that it's compatible, because that's the other issue. It's not necessarily it's broken, it's that it hasn't got the right operating system. I've probably got a couple of tablets kicking around here that if I switch them on, they'd just be like, yeah, I can't do anything anymore because I'm old. So what can we do with those things? So I'm afraid I don't have talk to these people about it, but Phoebe has my email, and if you drop me a line, I will keep you abreast of those conversations. And even if it's just somebody who can, I don't know, swap out your old leads for new leads, as a gesture, it's a start, isn't it? So yeah, frustrating and something that needs work, I think. Definitely. Yeah. I've got a question here from Olive. I'll try hands fire.
Olive, you submitted your question in advance, didn't you? We had a little chat about this one before the call started.
We've seen a big shift from artists using green touring riders, but for our drivers from other products. Right, I see. Yes, okay. So this is third-party promoters, and you're wondering where the scope is for you to enforce your values on a third-party promoter. So am I understanding this right? That you're essentially in those situations, they hire your space, and therefore legally it's their space for the night. Is that right? I think that's right. So a long time since I got involved in exactly. Is that? Yeah, precisely. Great. Okay. I haven't forgotten how venue hires work. Great. Right. So legally, there's absolutely nothing you can do, as I'm sure you're aware. It's up to them. But I think I think a lot of this work, there's two schools of thought, and I'm definitely on one side of the fence. So there's a school of thought I'm working with some people in Europe on working out a kind of festival blueprint to make all European festivals sustainable, which is incredibly ambitious, but we'll see where it goes to. I think it will do some good, if not total good. And there's a school of thought and a body of opinion within that group that says this has to be legislative, that ultimately the only way we're going to get the festivals to do this is if they legally have to. And then there's another opinion which says if we start talking about doing it legally, if we start enforcing it legally, we won't get the buy-in from the events to actually get to the point where we can do something cohesive, and therefore the whole thing will collapse. I tend to be on the opinion of the latter. So relating that to what you're asking me, I think there is. I think firstly what you say is, well, these are the values of the venue. This is how we do it when we have our own shows. This is how we want our venue to operate. And you make that clear to them. Then I think the next thing you can do is, as I said earlier, is make it public that that's the value of the venue. So you say Bristol Beacon. I think actually Bristol Beacon's quite well known for this, because I remember when you reopened, we had some conversations, or Faye from our place had some conversations with you. So I'm very aware of it. But you keep making it clear that that's the space and that's what it represents. And then maybe you can say, you can, in the right spaces and in the right spaces to create this debate, you can start this debate about, well, where we can, we'll do this, but we also have to exist as a venue for hire, and we don't have control on this. And I think those spaces would be things like some of the conferences, the event producers, Showman's Show, Showman's whatever it's called, Showman's Show is it called? And also, magazines like Live and Audience. I think, certainly there is an interest in those conversations in those spaces because I've had them. And I think we could definitely help you with that as well. I mean, I think something that we're always interested in doing is doing best case. We have an industry mailer that goes out to 2,500 people in the industry. And we just did a call out for anyone else who wanted to get involved, and another 800 odd people said, yeah, we want to get involved. So that's going to be like a 3,000 kind of mailer that goes out every month. And in that, we always like to focus on something that's positive. So it's not difficult for us to be in conversation with Bristol Beacon, talk about what you've done, but also talk about this as a challenge and put it out there and try and start a conversation. I mean, ultimately, we're not in a position to force the big companies to do things. We have to persuade them. But as I say, I'm more a fan of persuasion than I am of enforcement anyway, because I think it lasts longer and I think you bring people with you. But if that's in any way useful, up for having a conversation about that and making that happen to start that process and put that conversation out there. Reach out to me. Phoebe's got my email.
Yeah, I'll share that with everyone. I'll CC
Yeah,
you.
I'm just share my email with everyone. Yeah.
No.
We've got like 4 minutes left. Anybody else got anything they want to raise before we're done?
Hi, Lewis.
Hi, Helena.
Not a question, but it was very interesting what you were saying about jazz. And so I work for Jazz North. We're like the strategic development agency for jazz in the north of England. And certainly it'd be good to have a conversation. So it's great if Phoebe's sharing your email just to have a chat about things. It's just something that Jazz North are.
Yeah.
I'm here today is more like fact finding, and it's just something we're becoming more aware of. And
Yeah.
great to hear how we can get more involved.
Right.
And also there's like the Jazz Promotion Network. We've got good links with them. If the jazz industry is an area that you want to explore a bit more, then it'd be great to start that process, really.
Absolutely. I mean, we're interested in trying to we understand and one of the things I suppose the reasons I do things like this is try and demystify it. I think everybody thinks, oh God, if I get involved in this space, I'm going to have to commit to doing this, that, and the other, and it's going to cost money or capacity or time. No, it's not. It's not. I think we've all got into a space where we're a little bit scared to say what we believe in. because, you know, there are so many contrary voices out there. But you know, if you step back and you go, well, as a creative organization, we're allowed to say what we believe in, and we don't have to then go, you know, you see it all the time with things, you know, so somebody will say something about the climate, and then a load of people will pile in going, well, that's all right for you to say in your big house. And it's so, where is the relevance of that? And I think we need to, what we try and do is well, the first thing we've done is we created this big community so that people don't feel like they're on their own. And I think that's really, really important. So there is that kind of support, and you can look to your left and right, and you can see your peers and your contemporaries next to you and go, well, okay, that's good. But the other thing with it is that essentially, we don't have to back up everything we say with like scientific reports and so forth. It's quite reasonable to say, yeah, as creative people, we would like to be contributing to a better environment for our fans, our children, our grandchildren, our friends, whatever it is. And I think that if we can, you know, just find ways for people to feel part of it. Not everybody has to do something to be part of this either. That's the other thing. You can be part of it without being public. Not everybody's ready, or it's not appropriate. So yeah, anything that demystifies that, and you know, being on our mailing list is easy. Just sign up or get in touch with me and I'll put you on it, and that will bring you into the community, and then you can kind of find your feet in it. You know, ultimately there are spaces and things we do that you can be very supportive of, and there are things that you can do that are essentially lobbying, and you know, in terms of yourself, you know, it may be that you're lobbying for access to music for young people, you know. And you think, well, what's that got to do with the climate? Well, it kind of has, because climate becomes climate justice, which becomes social justice, which becomes this. So, you know, we're trying to interconnect all those things. We're not just strictly about, you know, kind of, you know, carbon, which is the most dull conversation on earth, frankly, and turns people off immediately. Any words of hope? Loads of words of hope. Yes. You know, if you look at where we are now as to where we were when we formed, we've got the Music Climate Pact. So we've got global record labels saying, yep, we're going to do something about it. We've got a hell of a lot more artists speaking out about it. I mean, just this year, you know, Billie Eilish has done a tour, right? Billie's always been around. Massive Attack have done their showcase. She's, you know, they've always been around as well. But then you start to look at all the artists that are talking about this issue and interrelated issues. So, you know, Nova Twins, Fontaine's DC, English teacher, you know, the whole bill at Finsbury Park, basically. I'm not going to point a kneecap because everyone goes, but that's complicated. But that, you know, it's becoming more prevalent and more acceptable again for artists to speak out on things they care about, and climate is one of them. And again, we're not partial. It's not just about climate for us. It's about artists being able to speak. It's about giving artists the space and the support to say what they believe. And then it's about the organizations supporting that and being a creative and positive partner for the artist. And I think we are seeing that a lot more. I think, you know, we're seeing that in live. We're seeing, you know, new innovations in live outdoor. We're seeing new innovations in indoor. We're seeing a real focus on audience travel. We're starting to see people go, well, we can't deal with audience travel, but it is an issue for us. It's 80% of all our emissions. If we talk about carbon, what do we do? And we're starting to see a cohesion around people going, well, we need to start to have a conversation about how people get to and from our venues. And that's a political conversation. We're seeing all that happening here. And more importantly, we're seeing the audience respond really positively to it. You know, we've got, as I say, 16,000 fans in a movement. They're hardcore. They're people that volunteer and get involved. There's a huge amount of people behind them that are also supportive in various ways. So, you know, in that sense of bringing some kind of sense of social purpose back to music, or reinforcing or reminding music that it has a social purpose, I think we really have done a lot of good work. Not just us, but everybody's done a lot of good work in the last 6 years. And I think that in terms of progression, the kind of the trend set now, you know, promoters are not going to go back from developing battery power because they can see the end game, they can see the profit. Artists aren't going to go back from speaking out because they've crossed the Rubicon now. They've done it. They're in that space. Why would you stop? Your audiences aren't going to suddenly go, oh, I don't want all this eco stuff. it's becoming normal at festivals and normal at events to interact with things that talk about, you know, don't put your waste here, take your tent home, this is what we do with our water, etc., etc., etc. So we're changing the landscape, which was always the plan. It wasn't to say to people, you have to do this. It was to change the landscape and then say to people in the landscape, look, this is the landscape. Isn't it better? And I think, you know, collectively, a lot of us are doing that. So I'm very, very positive about it. The wider climate emergency, well, you know, we do our bit and we'll keep pushing. That's a more complex conversation and we're out of time.
Thank you, Lewis. Thanks so
Thanks
much
for your time,
and thanks
everyone.
everyone for
I
joining
hope
us.
it's been useful.
Yeah, very useful indeed. And I've just mentioned in the chat that Youth Music have signed, we've actually been a signatory for quite a while, the funder commitment on climate change. And basically, we just want to do more of these type of sessions, and we want to obviously be leading the way as best we can in this area by, I guess it's all about communication, education, and you know, funding. So thank you so much anyway, and have a nice rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And drop me a line if you want to get in touch.